Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, hello, hello. Such a funny thing to nothing has actually changed, but suddenly I'm live. For some reason, I got caught off guard in that moment. Oh. So I really want to dive into the idea of mistakes. And there's a few ways that I think I have a different perspective than I often see sort of shared or talked about. And so I want to add these layers of my own experience or how I work with people around making mistakes. And as you arrive, and just welcome into this space. I always love to see where people are joining from. So if you have a moment and you just want to type in the chat where you're joining from, I would really love to sort of see and feel and get a sense of where in space and time we all are. It's 11:09 a.m. where I am on the west coast of Northern California. Today is Thursday, January 4th. Here we are. It feels like, I don't know about your experience, but partly I want to talk about this now actually as we enter into the new year. And awesome. Oh, hi, Lisa, coming from England. Wonderful. Okay, we've got San Francisco. We're in the same time zone here. But my experience of entering the new year this year, for whatever reason, is really even after the first week, I was like, how can it only be a week into January? It just feels like we've already been in the new year for a very, very long time. And so one of the things that can happen around that is this sense of why haven't things happened yet? And so anyway, I want to bring in, I know mistakes and that kind of urgency, they're slightly different, but they just feel like it feels like there's a weave there, a way that these are connected and related. So I want to talk about this as we sort of complete last year and move into this new year, and how do we move forward? How do we step forward? And how do we actually be with if we change our mind or if we choose and we make a mistake? So the place I'll start actually is, and actually before I dive in, I just want to say up front, whether you're live or you're watching the replay, I always love comments, questions, shares. I love to hear, where does this relate in your own life? How can you see it applying? Where have you had a different experience is great as well. But, and then any questions about how could this apply to my life? Or what about this circumstance? So any of those things are great. If you're live, I'll see if I can work with it live and actually we can have a little bit of a dialogue. And if you're watching the replay, then, we can have a little comment dialogue about how this relates to your life or not. So one of the things I really want to say is that I actually really come from the perspective that we do make mistakes. All of us make mistakes. And I believe that one of the most empowering things that we can do is acknowledge that we make mistakes and when we make mistakes. And so I am not of the mind that I hear a lot of people sort of talk about, or how this gets shared, which is there's no such thing as a mistake. As long as you learn from it, it's not a mistake. Or somehow how do we make a reframe so that actually this wasn't a mistake? To me, a lot of that ultimately speaks to a certain kind of bypassing. And so the very first layer I want to talk about, an empowering way to work with making mistakes, really includes self-forgiveness. And we actually bypass, I think it's an attempt when we say there's no such thing as a mistake, everything happens for a reason, as long as you learn from it, it's not a mistake, that we actually deny ourselves the opportunity of real forgiveness. And the real forgiveness actually has to come from oh, I made a mistake. And I can forgive myself for making a mistake. I do not need to reframe it. I do not need to pretend everything happens for a reason. I don't, like absolutely learning from our mistakes is an empowering response, but I don't need to pretend that it's not a mistake in order to learn from it. And the forgiveness actually comes from acknowledging, oh, I made a mistake. And actually, I'm okay. I'm still okay if I make a mistake. I'm still a good person if I make a mistake. I can still love myself if I make a mistake. And I can actually forgive myself for making mistakes, for having made a mistake. Whereas if we pretend that there are no mistakes, we actually deprive ourselves of the opportunity to forgive ourselves for making mistakes. I don't know how else to talk about it. It's like a weird catch-22 little loop there, but it does, it's like this little blip that just like bloop, and we don't actually get to go like, oh, I made a mistake. Now, self-forgiveness might include, so this is what I would say is a a first step, a primary step, an important foundational piece is the self-forgiveness piece. And sometimes that actually includes apologizing to ourselves, right? Like, oh, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. And what am I going to do now, right? Like that's the learning from, and that's where almost all teachings are focused on. And I'll speak to a couple of pieces around that because I do think that's important, but we actually have to land in the moment of like, oh, I spent this money, I made this choice, I did or didn't do this thing. Oh, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. I forgive myself, which allows me the opportunity to move on. And sometimes that includes apologizing to other people or another person, right? Sometimes we make a mistake that impacts other people. And it's the same, this capacity to actually acknowledge when we've made a mistake without bypassing it in any way, and to truly offer ourselves self-forgiveness is what allows us to make genuine apology or repair with another person or other people. If I'm like so wrong that I made a mistake, my capacity to go to another person just genuinely and say, oh, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. There might be a how can I make it up to, or how can I repair, or I'm just sorry. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. And that, like, my ability to just stand in that, as I don't need to defend myself, explain why, try to change circumstances, really comes from the place of going like, actually, I mean, I don't want to make a ton of mistakes. That's not like my goal in life, but I am an okay person. I am a good person. I am worthy of love and kindness and respect from myself and from other people, even when I make mistakes, or when I make mistakes, or, like, regardless of this, it's like, that's actually true. And the more that I can honor that in myself, the more easily I can just genuinely apologize to someone. And the less I'm demand, like the more I can actually remove the demand that they respond in a certain way in order to make me feel okay about it. So this happened with me. It actually happened with my mother. It was a little while ago now, but she needed to go to the DMV to take a driving test. I guess at a certain age, they just start saying like, hey, you need to come in and like, we're going to check this out. And I still don't know exactly where the source of this mistake was, but I heard the date of I had the date right, but I mapped it over to a Wednesday. And it was actually Tuesday that I got the date right, but I was like, that's Wednesday of next week. And I told my mother that I would drive her to her driving test because there's the off chance that she will not pass and somebody will need to drive her home. And then I was on the phone with her like the day before, and she said, so I'll see you tomorrow. And I was like, no, Wednesday. And she's like, it's the da-da-da date. And I was like, yeah, I know, that's Wednesday. And she's like, no, that's Tuesday. And I looked at it and it was like that horrible feeling, I mean, there's the sinking in my belly, but it was like, it also came to my awareness that I was looking at the calendar and I was seeing the date and that I was Wednesday and everything that I had actually on Tuesday. And so again, the slowing down and the capacity to actually, I mean, there were many things that could happen. I won't tell like the whole story because that's somewhat irrelevant, but like, do I change my schedule? Do we change her appointment? Blah, blah, blah. All of those come after. I just stopped and I said, oh, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. And she was very upset with me, understandably. I mean, it's like it caused a lot of chaos and confusion, and she was afraid about the test and all these kinds of things. But I just had to really land in, not talking about everything on my plate and why I made that mistake. And, she should be grateful because I was going to do something for her anyway. Like all the defensive things that wanted to come out and justify like why I was still a good person, just to sit in like, I can make a big mistake that actually lets somebody else down. And I can still love myself. I know I'm good. And therefore I can sit with another person and say, oh, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. And this is just a slight little tangent that I'll pin here. And then I want to go into these ways of actually then working with making mistakes. And how do we actually work with these in empowered ways once we've acknowledged I made a mistake, right? It requires that coming to the honesty with ourselves. But it actually normalizes. I mean, how good would it feel if somebody else said that to you, that there's a mix up and it actually impacts you, and rather than like, oh my goodness, well, it was for all these reasons and blah, 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 and they just had like, their kind of defense and excuse came up. I mean, sometimes we want to know like, how did that happen? So how did we have this miscommunication? And that's valuable. And that's different than like, well, da 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 and da da da, and you didn't send the email at this time, and I received it like this, and the defense that can come up. And somebody just literally said, oh my goodness, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. And it's that part that both we go like, oh, we can relax to their humanity. But I think in that moment, there's this mirroring piece where we relax to our own humanity. We're like, oh, this person that I love and respect, they made a mistake and they can apologize. Maybe I can do the same thing. Maybe we can actually normalize like, oh, humans make mistakes. And we're not happy about it. We're not like, I mean, sometimes I had an employer actually who did that. He sent me flowers one time because I made a mistake. And I think there is a beauty to going like, oh, okay, yeah, you're doing your best and you made a mistake, and like, let's move on. So that's the piece. And then what the last piece I'll say on this is like what that does too, also when we stand in that space, is it allows us to accept the consequences of our mistake without making them mean that we are bad and wrong in some way. Somebody might be upset. That was a consequence of, making this mistake with my mother. She was very upset with me. And, we don't have to let people abuse us. Or hold it over our heads for years and years and years. That's different. But just being like, oh, okay, there's that. Or sometimes mistakes cost us money. And, we can either get caught in like argument with other people about it or systems, or sometimes it's just inside our own heads, right? We're like, how could I have made that mistake? How do I get that money back? I can't believe it cost me that, rather than like, oh, I made a mistake. And this is what it cost me. And that allows us then to step into this second phase, which is, where am I going to go from here? Given that this is what actually happened, given that this is now where I'm standing, what is the next step I'm going to take? And so there's two perspectives that I want to, they both are ultimately come from the perspective of, this is what happened, this is where I am now, what do I want to do next? But there's slightly different gestures from that perspective. And one is more along the lines of, how am I going to make the best of this? How will I create value from this? So the example that I have in my life currently is that I joined a membership program, and to some extent, this is just like the kind of person I am. So it's a membership program. Actually, I like the leader of it. I don't know if she's really like, again, when I look at, the mistake that I think I made is that I signed up for a year. So I could have signed up month to month. And I actually think that would have been better for me. I think I signed up like back in June, and I probably wouldn't be a member now. Like, I actually don't. I'm like, oh, this isn't really the best place for me. This probably isn't quite the right teacher for me, or quite the right perspective. I got excited. I'm a person who tends to, like, if I want something, I'm just like, okay, great, and then I just do it. That has positive consequences. And it also, sometimes I was like, okay, I could have been paying, I don't know, month to month. And instead I spent, I don't know, $2,500 or $3,000 for a whole year. And I, I think that was a mistake. And so sitting in that, where I've been going now with this membership, and again, you could make different decisions about this. And this is, I'm going to speak to the second example in a moment, which is a little bit different. But with this membership, there's this like, okay, so how am I actually gonna make this worth, $3,000 for me? And in this membership, for instance, there's the actual membership community, which I mean, I knew it was going to be large, but it's like 11,000 people large, and I'm just like, that's too large for me. And so there's that, but there's also then content within the membership, and I'm like, okay, well, if I paid $3,000 for this membership, like, you damn well better believe, like, I'm going to go through the content and learn whatever I can learn from it. And like, I'm in the second module of the content, right? And that's on me. So I could just be like, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. That's horrible. And I could let that then run in the background, which would keep me, it would sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Limit my capacity to go like, okay, so how do I want to make this worth $3,000 for me? Or then looking at, okay, what are the other structures of this membership, right? There's like a way to ask questions, and there's like a particular time when you can share, who you are, what you do, and kind of offer your services and like make the most out of it. And I think in anything that we do, there's that place of looking, like, whether it's a membership like this, whether it's virtual, whether it's taking a class, whether it's having bought a product, whether it's choosing to put ourselves in a certain space at a certain time, right? These things, we go like, okay, so how am I going to make this something good for me? And I think that is, or how am I going to create the experience I want to have, would be another way. Well, maybe I find somebody that I think, again, this could be in the virtual space, or this could be in the more in-person space. There's that sense of like, okay, well, I want to find, the person or a few people that really I'm aligned with, and I want to start to create those connections. And actually, so the experience I want to have is one that's more personal, or one where I'm connecting regularly live with people, or the experience I want to have is like, so it comes back to a certain kind of responsibility, which I actually think is a form of leadership, right? Self-leadership first, but it applies in terms of leadership in a broader sense, that goes where we have to go first, not just, I made a mistake, like, but what is the experience I actually want to have here? And then that starts to give us the tools or the pathway. Then how do I want to go about creating that? So the experience I want to have is learning from this person. The experience I want to have is, gaining the tools to ... The experience I want to have is personally connecting with people who are engaging in this kind of a journey. The experience I want to have is blank, right? And then, okay, so how do I want to go about creating that within this, within the structures and systems that are available to me? Or is there something that, doesn't seem like it's available, but I could create? So that would be one way, right? How do I want to create the experience I want to have, and taking some responsibility for, again, we could talk about it in terms of value, but it really comes down to, what is it that I wanted from this? Like, what had me sign up for a year? What had me want to put myself in this container? What had me want to learn from this teacher? What did I want to get out of this? What did I think I would get in this membership? And how am I going to go about creating so that I actually do get that, even if it's kind of quote unquote not set up for me? So easy to look at all the reasons why, like, well, I can't do that in a group of 11,000 people. Or I can't do that in a group of this. I can't do that because dot, dot, dot. I can't. It's like, okay, but this is the thing I want to get here. How am I going to do that? And then the second example, it is similar, but I want to say it's just a slightly different angle on it. And this was years ago. It's funny, both of these examples for me are basically things that I paid for and spaces I put myself in that I was like, actually, I do not want to be here. So I'm kind of like, one of the reasons I'm pausing, I'm like, okay, there's got to be other examples that don't fit into this, but right now these are the ones I've got. So this was several years ago. I went to an in-person conference in San Francisco. And at that time, especially like the amount that I paid for it was definitely, it was significant for me. It was probably, again, like somewhere in the realm of $2,000 or $2,500. And it really, but it was for a weekend. And it was like at the time, I was just like, okay, this is like a chunk of change. This is an important event for me. But also I needed to, have my children cared for during that time. I needed to travel to San Francisco. I needed to stay there. I needed, it really took something in terms of my time, attention, financial resources. And now I will say that one of the things that provided is I ended up actually, because I was going and I connected with somebody ahead of time, I ended up with an opportunity to teach at like a pre-event. And that was fucking fantastic. Like, it was like, all systems go, ringing all my bells. And so that's the kind of place I think where we can hijack a little bit of, oh, well, it wasn't a mistake to sign up for it because it created this experience, rather than going like both and. I think they're both true. Like, I got this experience and it was totally worth it. Like, I still look back at that and I'm like, that was a fucking fantastic teaching experience. However, I went to the public conference then on Friday. I think the pre-event was Thursday. Friday was the public, and enjoyed it for like 3 hours, maybe, from early, for like pre-things to like, then there started to be presenters and blah, 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 like all these things. And then I just was like, oh my God, I don't want to be in a conference room. I don't like how many people there are. There's enough people that I like either know peripherally or know who I am, that like just consistently people are going like, hey, how are you? What's up with you? Which I was just like, I don't even know how to answer that question. I don't want to talk this much. It might surprise some people, anyway, I'm like actually very introverted. I like to be on stage, but like just a lot of interaction in this way. It's just like, oh my God, I got tired. I got overwhelmed. I like didn't enjoy being there. And ultimately I sort of stuck it out through the day. And I went to some presentations and I met some people and I was there and I was like that. And then when I went back to the place that I was staying at, I ended up staying with friends that I just love. And there was definitely this part of me that was like, okay, but I paid like $2,500 for this. Like, I got to go. I got to like make a value out of it, which again, in my previous example, I think there is a way, like, how am I going to create the value? But what really came to me that night was like lying on my bed. And it was actually the phrase that came to me was, don't fuck yourself twice. Now, actually getting fucked twice by, like in a way that you want to be fucked sounds good. But this was like the not good way. I was like, don't fuck yourself twice. Just because you spent money on this doesn't mean that you should put up with an experience, like somehow like martyr yourself to an experience you don't, like, you're not getting anything out of, you're not enjoying, feels physically draining, and you don't want to be there. And I woke up the next morning and just decided that I was going to spend the day on my friend whose house I was staying at in San Francisco, like on her roof deck in the sun. I was doing yoga. I was journaling. It meant that I had a long time to like sit and just talk with her in the morning. And I thought, like, I mean, especially at that time, it was probably 4 or 5 years ago now. Gosh, maybe more. Anyway, like 5 years ago, which means my kids were like, 3 and 6. And like, I never had days where I just like laid in the sun and did yoga when I wanted to do yoga, and then stopped and then journaled and then read and then, ate food at a leisurely pace, and just like, I was like, oh, that's what I paid for. Like, this is totally worth $2,500. If you've ever been like a struggling single parent, you can probably relate. And so again, in some way, I think these are both basically taking responsibility and creating experience so that it actually works for us. But one, I would say, comes more from that perspective of how am I going to create the experience I wanted to have here. And the other is this, like, don't fuck yourself twice. Just because you spent a lot of time or money making a decision or putting yourself in a circumstance does not mean you need to suffer through it. There are the times when to stay and go, like, actually, I'm going to learn something here, or I'm going to create it in a way, or I'm going to connect with people, or I'm going to, I mean, I could choose to just leave this membership. I could be like, oh, okay, so that was like, I spent $3,000 on it, and like, actually, I'm just going to free up the mental space. I'm going to free up the time. That would be that is a one possible response, totally valid response. But for me, like, there's content in the member site that I can get value from. There are people there to connect with. There are questions, so I'm like, okay, rather than getting stuck on what I thought it was going to be or how I thought I was going to get that information, is like, how can I get it? But this in-person, conference a number of years ago is really the, like, don't fuck yourself twice. So if I really don't want to be here anymore, then let yourself change your mind. Let yourself let go of things, even if you spent what, especially in the moment, might feel like an inordinate amount of money or time. Having made a decision doesn't actually mean that it's the right decision to stay the course. And that, I think, allows us to take moments where we could say, like, oh, it was maybe it was a mistake to sign up for this conference, or maybe it was a mistake to enroll for an entire year in a membership before I really knew anything about how it was run. Like, oh, I made a mistake. That's okay. I'm still good, which means, therefore, then I can just choose. And what do I want to do now? What can I learn about myself? What can I learn about my future decisions? How can I set myself up better in the past? And what do I want to do with the decision that I made that is a mistake now? Like, what do I want to do? How do I either want to make value out of it, or how do I want to just change my mind and, like, let go of what no longer serves to create space for what does, like laying in the sun and doing yoga on a San Francisco roof deck. If there are any shares or questions in these last couple of minutes, I know sometimes there's a lag on Facebook for bringing that in. But regardless, I certainly hope that this serves you in some place in your life, whatever specific experience that might be. And it's always a pleasure, even though I don't get to see you when I do these lives, but it's a pleasure to know that there are people who are here with me live. And I appreciate your attention. How long might it take to forgive yourself? Sometimes it takes time. That's a great question. And to some extent, I think that partly depends. Some of it is the practice. So I'm far better I'm so much faster at forgiving myself now because I've been doing it for a long time. So this is an example of, like, so this is eight years ago now, because it was right after my daughter was born. So I had moved when I was pregnant with my daughter. And I moved kind of fast. I was not like in, dangerous situation, but I just sort of was like, I need out of here. I moved kind of fast. As soon as I moved, pretty quickly after I moved into the place that I moved, I was like, oh my God, we're not staying here long-term. This is not like our long-term community, but we're okay for now. I want to say, so we probably moved in like July, like August, September, October, November, December. So 5 months after we moved there, something like that, my daughter was born, and literally, I swear to God, she was born at 10:48 p.m. I woke up the next morning and I was like, we're moving. And I was a single parent at that time. And I had one of those wraps. It's different than the Moby, but I had one of those like wraps. I like strapped the baby to my body and I started packing, and we moved a month later. So I had a 3.5-year-old and I had a newborn baby, and I packed an entire, I mean, I had friends that helped me, but like I packed an entire house and moved in a month. And I really, I was like, wait, what was the point of this story? So I had a lot of shame. I was like, oh, I shouldn't have moved here. I should have taken more time. And this was actually one of the beginnings of the learnings. Like for me, just at kind of a being level, for those of you who ever get into the Enneagram, I do the 1 on the Enneagram. And so there was this real like, oh, I did the wrong thing. And it kind of held in like a tight way, like I did it wrong. And that means I'm bad, or this sort of linear, rigid, not just thinking, but like experiencing around it. And I remember was my ex-husband. I like either sent an email or I wrote a text, and there was this moment where I was like, I made a mistake. I literally wrote out the words and I started sobbing. And I was saying it to myself, I was like, oh, I made a mistake. I made a mistake. Made a mistake, and I'm sobbing. I'm just like weeping, and it started to just soften something around my heart, like in this chest. It was like, oh, and I wasn't actually saying to myself like I'm still good, but there was this way that I was saying like I made a mistake. Oh, I'm still a good person. It actually started to really live in me in that way. And it took me some time to really unwind and let go of that in that experience. But that was to me, I don't think that each individual experience has to be separate. Like when we begin to work with forgiving ourselves in this way, it touches all the places. It becomes something where it's like, actually, I know that I can forgive myself for making mistakes overall. And so each time this happens, each time I work with forgiveness, each time I allow myself to just say, I made a mistake, and here is where I'm going to go now, rather than this is why I shouldn't have done it. This is why I'm bad for doing it. This is what I should have done instead, right? Like, oh, but I can sit in the, oh, I made a mistake. I think about this too with like a relationship that I was in, and I kind of had to do this retroactively because I wasn't so much in the process of this at the time. But there's a relationship I was in my early 20s that I look back and I'm like, I don't actually think the relationship itself was a mistake, but I was in it for like 3 years too long. And so there was this point where I was like, oh, I stayed too long. Oh, I stayed too long. Oh, I stayed too long, right? And it just letting it be okay, not like, oh, I'm so bad. Oh, I wish I hadn't. And this is what would have happened. And this is how, which just keeps kind of ejecting us into the past rather than sitting in the present moment, what's actually so. And then looking at, and so where do I want to go? How do I, and sometimes we need to ask ourselves the same way we might with another person, so what do I need to do in order to fully forgive myself? And is there any repair? So we often forget that with ourselves. We do all the self-punishment. Shouldn't have done that. Bad, bad, bad. Because we have this idea that punishing ourselves will keep us from making mistakes in the future. Just not true. That's a whole other live. But that willingness to say, is there anything I need to do to repair this? Do I need to apologize to myself? How can I show myself like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I stayed that long in that relationship. And I promise I'm going to do my best to listen to my heart, to like you little heart, right? I promise I'm going to do my best to listen better in the future. Or this is the work I'm doing so that I can hear that call sooner, or, these pieces. And so every time that we do any work of self-forgiveness, we actually do the work in every area that either from the past we might need to forgive, in the present we might need to forgive, and going forward. I mean, I don't know. I'm like, is this true? I'm just like, I don't know that I feel like I've made any major mistakes in like in really recent time. And a lot of that, again, is that I do a lot of work around my own intuition and listening and guidance. So I just don't override myself hardly ever. But but I'm more likely also to catch it and like catch little moments of overriding, or little things that I'm doing, or little ways that I'm betraying myself, or moments that I'm like, oh wait, I didn't want to do it that way. And I just catch them. And I'm just much quicker to go like, oh yeah, darn it, wish I hadn't signed up for the whole year. And I have a little more humor with it, and it allows me to forgive myself more quickly. And then that allows me to go like, okay, so how do I want to respond to this? Okay, cool. This is how I want to get the value. Okay, great. Da 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 da. So yes, I want to go back to this question, which is like, sometimes it does take time. And there are like, sometimes like we could call them bigger mistakes, or mistakes that we stayed in longer, right? Like that relationship was like 3 years. It wasn't just, I should have left then, and that's just one mistake. It was like everything that came from the 3 years. And so, yeah, sometimes it's like, okay, actually, and then it becomes an ongoing act of self-forgiveness. Every time we touch something that touches that mistake, we go, oh yeah, okay, that was a mistake. I forgive myself. And we just keep touching it. We just keep coming back to that for as long as it takes. Hi, Ayana. Oh, my love. Sweet to see you here. So thank you, Kendra. This has been super helpful. The mistake I made was at work, and I really don't have access to anyone on the other end of my mistake to apologize. I would say act as though you can't, like, first of all, it sounds like there's a mistake at work, and if you can't apologize to another person, my sense is there's twofold. One is, I would say it sounds like there's some piece of integrity in yourself that probably got crossed, or just that matters to you. Like, and so that again becomes a piece of self-forgiveness. So there's a woman on my team who made a mistake, and she is coming to me because she does have access to me, and she said, oh, I made these mistakes. This is how it happened, and this is actually what it cost you. And she's basically saying to me, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and how can I make it better? And so she does get to, but what the reason I'm using it as an example is that, so it cost me money, basically. And what I get for her is that that's a piece of integrity in herself. So yes, there's a relational piece between us. And frankly, I mean, again, might not always be the case. Like sometimes it might be different, but she's coming to me and she's asking me, should she take this money like off of her invoice to me? And it's a chunk of change. And just the fact that she's asking, literally, the fact that this woman like just came to me and said, oh my goodness, I just realized I made these mistakes, and this is how it all played out, and it cost you this much money, and I'm wondering how I should make it better. And one possibility I see is that I just deduct that from what you pay me. Like, I'm literally like, it is forgiven, because I can feel her integrity in that. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. But what I get is that there's also this piece, like, it matters to her that she missed something that cost someone that she supports, that cost me money, or that, like, she's supporting me. And so that's a piece of self-forgiveness also. Like, oh yeah, I made a technical error. And like, again, in the sense, I mean, it's, so we're talking about like $500. Like, that does matter. And when we look at it, we're like, oh, you made a technical error. Like, we all do that. And then again, in some of our lines of work, right, it's going to have a bigger impact because it's like bigger pieces of money, or it does actually impact people's lives. And sometimes people's lives, like if you work in the health industry, or there are these things, so then, when we go into there's the forgiveness, and then we go like, oh yeah, how did this mistake come to be made? Can sometimes be part of it. Oh, I was distracted, or I was underslept, or I was moving too fast, or I put myself under pressure because I wanted to perform. Okay, so how do I want to work with that part going forward? And in some way, that kind of repair is part of the process of self-forgiveness. I trust myself that I care about this, and I see this is how I want to do healing work or growth work, so that when I'm in a situation where I start to feel pressured, then I understand this, and this is how I respond, right? We do this kind of work, and that's part of the healing and self-forgiveness. So I would say this piece of like, oh, how do I forgive myself for for having hurt another person? How do I forgive myself for having made a mistake that cost somebody else money? How do I forgive myself for making a mistake that, okay, so there can always be these pieces of self-repair. And sometimes it can be helpful, like if we don't have access to a person to actually say this, but sometimes we can actually write a letter. And as though, if I still could have access to my boss or my colleague or this friend who's now cut me off or this person who says they don't want any communication right now, right? We go like, oh, I'm going to respect their boundary. But I can write them a letter and I can just keep it. I can burn it. I can bury it in the ground. I can go have a conversation with a tree and actually share everything that I would want to share, how I would want, we can do some of that in ways that don't require the other person. Yes, Jenna, I made a mistake. And I love what you say, just underscoring this. I mean, I love it when you call me brilliant. That totally works for me. So you say this is brilliant, especially the way it brings us to the present. So, I mean, what I love about that you said that, Jenna, is like, first of all, almost all my teachings and practices will bring us to the present, because not only is that where forgiveness happens or where repair happens or where choice happens, or it's literally where everything happens, right? It's where joy happens. It's where pleasure happens. It's where literally our entire lives happen in the present. And so we have to be careful about bypassing. But it is this place of like, oh, look, this is how I'm throwing myself into the past, like continually going back to the past actually keeps me out of the present. Or this is where I'm projecting into the future, and saying, what do I want to do with how things are is different than leaving ourselves to go into the future. Right? But literally our whole lives happen in the present. So I just love that you caught that, Jenna, and so that we can underscore it. I think I'm not 100% sure I'm saying your name right, but I think it's Tuti. And you say, I made a mistake. I jumped into a new relationship 3 weeks after a 20-year relationship ended. So again, this is one of those things that it involves another person. And this really depends on what you believe this relationship to be. Like, oh, it was too fast. Oh, this isn't the right person. Oh, right. So, but there can be places to go to someone and be like, right, there's I made a mistake. I actually got involved too fast. That doesn't mean I don't love you. That doesn't mean I'm not attracted to you. That doesn't mean I don't want to be with you in the future. And the truth is, I actually need to take more time for this, this, and this. Now, and again, this goes back to the very beginning, which is there might be consequences. They might get mad. They might be hurt. You might lose the relationship completely. I mean, I really am of the belief, people will be like, but I met the one. I'm like, if they're really the one, I guarantee you can take space. They will love you more for taking space for your own growth, for your own healing, for your own process. The ones who love you will love nothing more than for you to take the space to become more and more whole, in order to be more and more whole in relationship with them. Now, you might need space completely, or it might be like, actually, I just realized I moved too fast. I need to slow this way down. Can we just have platonic lunch, every week? Because I really do want to stay in contact with you. And I moved too fast. I'm so sorry. Right? I'm so glad that it's helpful for you to say out loud and not have to make the best of it. I think it's so important. Some things are just shitty. And it's such a, it's great to always be like, yeah, what can I learn? Or what have I learned? Or, is there any benefit that came? These are all empowering questions. And when they come as this obligation to make the best of it, or everything happens for a reason, it's just sometimes that's bullshit. Sometimes things are really, really hard and really, really challenging. And it is oppressive to force people to try to make the best of horrible circumstances. But to go this is what I did, this is what happened, this is what led me here, and this is where I am now. And where am I going to go from here will always be empowering. Especially if we're not and where am I going to go from here really, really fast to make the best of everything, right? But just no, okay, this is where I am, and where am I going to go from here at the right pace for me and everyone involved, but starting with for me. Ayana said, this feels spot on. I'm having a super tender place open around this after walling off my feelings for months. Also, there's anger around feeling treated unjustly around the mistake, which I don't totally understand, which maybe confuses or compounds, complicates my process. Yeah. So look, you're already doing it. Like, I don't know, what have I been talking for like an hour or something? Like, you're already doing it. It just requires, and this is why sometimes, choosing therapists, coaches, guides, programs, spaces is supportive. It's not because like, oh, we need the other person, or we can't do this alone, or we don't know, or they know better than us. But this, I don't know, I'm projecting on you here, but I'm like, look, Ayana, like, you stepped into my space, and part of what that means, all it means is like, you decided to put some attention on this, maybe let go of other things that are going on, put a little bit of focused attention, and already in the space of 1 hour, you're like, oh, there's this part, and then there's this part, and then there's this part. There's like a little space and a little breath around the whole thing. When we start to see that, in this, there's this particular example where there's like this feeling, and there's this feeling, and then there's anger, and then there's what like, taking responsibility for ourselves does not mean taking over responsibility for other people, right? So I can still be like, actually, I'm pissed. I'm pissed at the way that I was talked to. I'm pissed at the way I was fired. I'm pissed that nobody asked for blah, blah, blah. And I made a mistake. Both are true. And here's how this is how I'm working with my mistake. And this is how I'm forgiving myself for my mistake. And this is how I'm going to process the anger I feel about this situation, or towards this person, or around this systemic experience, right? When we tease them apart, they're connected, they came up together, but they can actually both be true. They do not negate each other. Okay. Oh, that was so fun. Thank you so much for bringing like your real life, bringing your shares, engaging with the process. That's my favorite part. And I'm just sending you so much love. Ciao.